The night Emily walked out began like any other rainy Friday in Seattle, but Danielle felt the shift in the air long before the door closed behind her. The house on Maple Street was quiet except for the steady tapping of rain against the windows and the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Daniel had just returned from work, his tie still loose around his neck, his phone buzzing with unread emails he no longer had the energy to answer. He noticed the suitcase first, small, navy blue, resting near the staircase. His heart tightened. Emily stood by the living room window, arms folded, staring at the wet street outside as if she were already somewhere else. She looked calm, almost too calm, and that frightened him more than shouting would have. When he asked what was going on, she turned slowly, her eyes glossy but steady, and said she couldn't do this anymore. No drama, no raised voice, just tired honesty. She said she felt alone for a long time, that their marriage had become a routine built around his meetings and deadlines. Daniel tried to explain that he was working hard for their future, for the house, for the vacations they once dreamed about, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew they sounded empty. Emily shook her head gently and said she didn't need a bigger future, she needed him in the present. The space between them felt wider than the room itself. Daniel remembered how they used to laugh while cooking dinner, how they stayed up late planning road trips to Oregon, how they promised never to let life make them strangers. Somewhere along the way, those promises faded into silence. He thought about the nights he came home after she had fallen asleep, about the mornings he rushed out before she finished her coffee. He had told himself it was temporary, that success required sacrifice, that she understood. But standing there, he realized he had never truly asked how she felt. Emily picked up the suitcase handle, and the small click echoed loudly. She said she needed space to think, that she didn't recognize herself anymore in this marriage. Daniel wanted to reach for her, to apologize, to promise change, yet pride and confusion kept him rooted to the hardwood floor. He asked if there was someone else, and she hesitated just long enough to answer without words. She didn't confirm it, but she didn't deny it either. That silence pierced deeper than anger. He felt a wave of disbelief, then regret, then fear. He wondered when the distance between them had become wide enough for another person to step in. The rain outside grew heavier, streaking down the glass like tears the sky could shed more easily than he could. Emily walked to the door, paused for a second as if waiting for him to stop her, but he remained frozen, unsure whether holding on would fix anything or only make it worse. When the door finally closed, the sound felt final, like a chapter ending without warning. Danielle stood alone in the quiet house, listening to her car start and fade down the street. He sank onto the couch, staring at the blank television screen, seeing reflections of moments he had taken for granted, her smile when he surprised her with flowers, the way she leaned against him during movies, the warmth of her hand in his on cold winter mornings. He realized how quickly comfort can turn into distance when care turns into routine. Hours passed, yet he didn't move. He checked his phone again and again, hoping for a message saying she changed her mind, but none came. The kitchen clock ticked loudly, marking a new life he had not prepared for. He walked upstairs and opened their bedroom door. Her side of the closet looked half empty, hangers spaced apart like missing pieces of a puzzle. The sight made everything real. He sat on the edge of the bed and tried to trace back the moment things began to break. Was it the promotion he celebrated alone at the office? Was it the anniversary dinner he rescheduled twice? Or was it something quieter, something that built slowly while neither of them spoke? He understood now that love does not disappear in one dramatic scene, it fades in the silence between conversations not had. As midnight approached, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every memory, every missed chance to hold her a little longer or listen a little closer. He told himself she would come back after a few days, that space would remind her of what they shared. But deep down, he sensed that this separation carried more weight than temporary anger. He felt both betrayed and responsible, hurt yet aware of his own absence. The house felt colder than before, even with the heater running. In that lonely stillness, Daniel faced a truth he had avoided for months. He had been physically present but emotionally distant, and now the cost of that distance was sitting in an empty driveway. He closed his eyes and whispered her name into the darkness, unsure if he was asking for forgiveness or simply wishing to turn back time, unaware that this painful night was only the beginning of a story that would test his heart in ways he never expected. 3 weeks after Emily left, Daniel had stopped expecting the sound of her key in the door, but he still glanced up every time headlights passed the living room window, and that gray Sunday afternoon felt no different until the doorbell rang. Sharp and sudden through the quiet house. He almost ignored it, assuming it was a delivery, but something in the steady second ring made him walk to the door, and when he opened it, he froze in surprise because Margaret Thompson stood on the porch, her long wool coat damp from the Seattle drizzle, her silver hair pulled back neatly, her eyes calm yet searching. Emily's mother had always carried herself with quiet strength, the kind of woman who noticed everything but spoke only when necessary, and Daniel felt a mix of guilt and confusion rise in his chest because he had no idea what she knew or why she was there. She offered a small, polite smile and said she had driven down from Vancouver that morning, adding that she hoped she wasn't intruding, and before Daniel could gather his thoughts, he stepped aside and invited her in. The house looked tired, like him. Dishes were stacked in the sink, a blanket lay folded on the couch where he had been sleeping some nights, and the air carried the stale stillness of a place without laughter. Margaret took it all in with one slow glance but made no comment. She simply set her purse down and asked if they could sit at the kitchen table. Daniel braced himself for blame, for questions about what he had done wrong, yet her first words surprised him because she asked how he was holding up. The kindness in her tone caught him off guard, and for a moment he didn't trust himself to answer honestly, but something about her steady gaze made him drop his guard, and he admitted he wasn't sleeping well, that the silence in the house felt louder at night, that he kept replaying his mistakes like a broken record. Margaret nodded, not in agreement with his guilt but in understanding of his pain, and she told him Emily had called her in tears a few days earlier but had shared very little detail, only that she needed space and had made choices she wasn't sure how to explain. Daniel felt a tight ache at the word choices, yet he remained quiet. Margaret said she didn't come to defend anyone or to accuse anyone, she came because she believed broken situations deserved calm voices instead of angry ones. That sentence alone shifted something inside him. She asked if she could stay for a couple of days because she needed time to think before returning home, and Daniel agreed without hesitation, partly because he respected her and partly because the thought of another human presence in the house felt like relief. Over the next few days, a quiet rhythm formed between them. Margaret woke early and made coffee, the warm smell filling the kitchen in a way Daniel hadn't realized he missed. She tidied small corners of the house without making it obvious, straightened photo frames, opened windows for fresh air, and cooked simple meals in the evenings. They ate across from each other at the wooden table where he and Emily once shared dreams, and conversation began carefully but slowly grew deeper. Margaret asked about his work, about the promotion he had chased so hard, and Daniel explained the long hours, the pressure, the belief that success meant security. He confessed he thought providing financially was enough, that he assumed Emily understood his absence as sacrifice for their future. Margaret listened without interrupting, then shared something he had never known. Emily had always feared being overlooked, even as a child, especially after her father passed away when she was young. She learned to hide her needs because she didn't want to seem demanding. Hearing that made Daniel sit back in his chair as if the air had shifted. He realized Emily may have felt invisible long before she found comfort elsewhere. Margaret didn't excuse her daughter's actions, but she explained them with quiet honesty. She admitted that people sometimes seek warmth in the wrong places when they feel unseen at home. Daniel felt both hurt and responsible at the same time, a heavy mix that left him silent for a long moment. The rain continued outside each evening, and the house no longer felt as empty, yet the absence of Emily remained like a missing note in a familiar song. One night, after dinner, Margaret stood by the living room shelf and picked up a framed photo of Daniel and Emily on their wedding day, both smiling with bright hope in their eyes. She asked him softly if he still loved her. The question hit deeper than any accusation could. He answered yes without hesitation, because despite the betrayal, despite the distance, the love hadn't vanished, it had just been buried under pride and neglect. Margaret nodded and said love alone isn't enough without effort, but effort without love feels forced. Her words settled between them like truth no one could argue with. Daniel began to see Margaret not just as his mother-in-law but as a woman who had lived through her own regrets. She spoke about her late husband, about times she almost gave up on their marriage because communication felt impossible, about how silence can quietly destroy what anger never could. Those late-night conversations became a turning point for Daniel. He started to reflect not only on what Emily had done but on how he had contributed to the distance. He walked through the house differently, noticing small things Emily once handled, watering plants, organizing bills, leaving notes on the fridge. He saw how much of their life together he had allowed her to carry alone. Margaret's presence did not create scandal or confusion. Instead, it created clarity. She never crossed boundaries, never made him feel judged, and never positioned herself against her daughter. She simply offered perspective and calm strength. By the end of the week, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt since the door closed behind Emily: balance. The pain was still there, but it no longer felt chaotic. Margaret packed her suitcase slowly, preparing to return to Vancouver. But before leaving, she paused at the doorway and told Daniel one final thing: sometimes people run because they are afraid of fighting for what matters, and sometimes those left behind must decide whether they want to chase or let go. Her words lingered long after her car disappeared down the street. Daniel stood in the quiet house again, but this time the silence felt different, not empty, but thoughtful. He realized Margaret's visit had not been about choosing sides, it had been about understanding the deeper cracks in a marriage that once seemed strong. And as he looked around the home filled with memories, he sensed that the story between him and Emily was not as finished as he had first believed, though he still didn't know whether the next chapter would bring healing or final goodbye. A few days after Margaret returned to Vancouver, the house felt steady but uncertain, as if waiting for something to happen. And that something came on a quiet Thursday evening when Daniel's phone lit up with Emily's name on the screen, a name he had stared at countless times without daring to call. His heart pounded as he answered, and for a second neither of them spoke, only shared the sound of breathing across distance. Emily's voice was softer than he remembered, stripped of pride, and she asked if he had a moment to talk. Daniel stepped outside onto the back porch, the cool air brushing his face, and said yes. She didn't waste time pretending everything was fine. She admitted the relationship she had rushed into after leaving him was already falling apart. What felt exciting at first quickly turned shallow. She said she had confused attention with connection, and now she felt more lost than before. Daniel listened without interrupting, surprised by how calm he felt. Weeks earlier, he might have reacted with anger or desperation, but Margaret's visit had grounded him. Emily continued, saying she had blamed him for being distant, and while that hurt was real, she now saw she had chosen escape instead of honest conversation. She apologized for the email, for the silence, for walking away without fighting for them. Daniel closed his eyes as she spoke, letting her words settle. He remembered the night she left, the way the door sounded final, and he realized how much had changed inside him since then. He told her he had spent many nights thinking about his own failures, about how he had hidden behind work instead of facing the slow drift between them. He admitted he should have listened more and assumed less. There was no shouting, no blame passed back and forth, only truth spoken carefully. Emily said she felt ashamed that she had broken something precious and didn't know if it could ever be repaired. Daniel answered honestly that trust once cracked takes time to rebuild, but time alone means nothing without effort. She asked if they could meet in person, somewhere neutral, just to talk face to face. After a pause that felt heavy but not hostile, he agreed. The next afternoon they met at a small park near Lake Union, a place where they once walked during early dating days. The sky was overcast, the air cool, fitting the mood between them. When Daniel saw her standing near a bench, hands tucked into her coat pockets, he noticed the confidence she once carried had softened into humility. She looked tired, not physically but emotionally, as if the choices she made had caught up with her. They greeted each other with a cautious nod instead of a hug, and that small distance said more than words. Emily spoke first, explaining she had felt invisible for months before she left, that every cancelled dinner and missed conversation built quiet resentment inside her. She admitted she never clearly told him how deeply it hurt because she didn't want to seem demanding. Daniel responded that he had mistaken her silence for understanding, believing love meant steady support without constant reassurance. As they talked, the past unfolded without bitterness. Emily confessed that the man she turned to offered quick comfort but no real partnership. There was attention but no history, excitement but no foundation. She realized she had traded stability for escape. Daniel felt the sting of that truth yet appreciated her honesty. He told her he didn't want a marriage built on fear of loneliness or guilt over mistakes, he wanted clarity. He asked her directly if she truly wanted to rebuild their life or if she simply felt disappointed in the alternative she chose. The question lingered in the cool air. Emily answered slowly, saying she missed him, not just the house or the routine, but him, the way he made her feel safe, the shared jokes, the quiet mornings. She admitted she had taken those for granted. Daniel studied her expression carefully, searching for sincerity rather than emotion. He saw regret, but also determination. He realized something important in that moment: he still loved her, but he was no longer desperate. The weeks alone had forced him to face himself. He had begun setting boundaries at work, leaving the office earlier, reconnecting with friends he had neglected, and rediscovering parts of his identity outside of marriage. He was no longer the man frozen in the living room watching a suitcase roll away. He told Emily that if they tried again, it would not be a return to the old pattern. They would need counseling, honest communication, and equal effort. No silent suffering, no assuming the other could read unspoken pain. Emily agreed without hesitation. She said she was ready to do the work, even if it took time to earn back his trust. As they sat there, a fragile hope formed, not dramatic, not certain, but real. Daniel understood forgiveness wasn't instant. It was a choice repeated daily. He felt the weight of betrayal, yet he also felt the strength that came from growth. Before they parted, Emily reached for his hand carefully, giving him space to pull away if he wished. He didn't. The contact was gentle, familiar yet new, like rediscovering a melody long forgotten. They agreed to meet again the following week and to take things slowly. As Daniel walked back to his car, he didn't feel victorious or defeated. He felt clear. Margaret's words echoed in his mind about choosing whether love was worth fighting for. Now he saw the fight wasn't against each other but against old habits and pride. That evening, alone in the house once more, he didn't feel trapped by silence. Instead, he felt at a crossroads shaped by honesty rather than fear. For the first time since Emily left, the future didn't seem like a closed door but a question waiting for a careful answer, and Daniel knew whatever happened next would be built not on assumption, but on truth spoken out loud. The weeks after their meeting at the park moved quickly but carefully, like two people crossing thin ice while learning to trust each step. And Daniel felt both hope and caution guiding him as he and Emily began the slow work of rebuilding what once seemed broken beyond repair. They started with simple changes, meeting twice a week for coffee before work, sitting across from each other without phones on the table, speaking honestly even when the truth felt uncomfortable. Emily admitted she still carried guilt for leaving the way she did, and Daniel admitted he still felt flashes of hurt when he thought about how easily she had walked away, but instead of hiding those feelings, they brought them into the open. They scheduled sessions with a marriage counselor in downtown Seattle, and in that quiet office they learned how much damage silence had caused. Daniel realized he often solved problems by working harder instead of talking more, while Emily realized she avoided conflict until frustration pushed her toward escape. Each session felt like peeling back layers of pride. There were tears sometimes, but no shouting, no blame, just accountability. Daniel set firm limits at work, leaving the office by 6, no matter how full his inbox looked. The first evening he cooked dinner at home instead of answering emails, Emily noticed immediately. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it mattered. She began writing small notes again, leaving them on the fridge like she used to during their early years, simple words like "thank you for trying" or "I see the effort." Those notes carried more weight than expensive gifts ever had. Trust did not return overnight, yet it slowly grew through consistent actions. Daniel stopped checking her tone for hidden meaning. Emily stopped assuming his silence meant indifference. They replaced guessing with asking. Some nights were still heavy. Memories of the separation would surface unexpectedly, and Daniel would grow quiet, but instead of shutting down, he would tell her what he was feeling. Emily would listen without defending herself. That openness became their new foundation. Margaret called once a week from Vancouver, never pushing, only reminding them that strong relationships are built daily, not just promised once. Daniel appreciated her calm wisdom more than ever, knowing her visit had shifted his perspective when he needed it most. One Saturday afternoon, months after Emily had left, Daniel stood in their backyard watching her plant new flowers along the fence. The sunlight touched her hair, and he saw both the woman who had hurt him and the woman he had chosen to forgive. He walked over, knelt beside her, and helped press the soil around the roots. It felt symbolic, nurturing something fragile but alive. Later that evening, they sat on the porch steps, talking about plans not in terms of years ahead but in terms of shared moments, weekend hikes, visiting Margaret in Vancouver, maybe even renewing their vows quietly one day when they both felt ready. Daniel realized love the second time around felt different. It was less about excitement and more about understanding. Less about proving and more about presence. He no longer feared being alone because he had faced it and survived. Emily no longer feared being invisible because she had learned to speak before resentment grew. The house that once felt empty now felt intentional. They created small rituals, Sunday morning pancakes, evening walks after dinner, monthly check-ins where they talked about feelings without distraction. These habits strengthened them in ways dramatic promises never could. There were still scars, but scars meant healing had begun. One evening, as the sky turned orange over Seattle, Daniel stood beside Emily in the backyard, the same place where he once stood alone questioning everything. She slipped her hand into his, not cautiously this time, but confidently. He squeezed back, aware of how much effort it took to reach that simple moment. He understood forgiveness was not weakness, it was courage. Emily looked at him and said she was grateful he chose to fight for them instead of closing his heart. Daniel replied that he almost didn't, but he was thankful he listened to the quiet wisdom offered during the darkest days. They didn't erase the past, they learned from it. Their story was not perfect, but it was honest. The door that once slammed shut had reopened not because pain disappeared, but because both of them decided to grow. As the evening air cooled and the first stars appeared, Daniel felt peace settle inside him. Love had returned, not as the same bright spark from years ago, but as a steady flame built on truth, effort, and second chances. And in that calm light, he understood something deeply. Sometimes losing someone shows you how to truly see them, and sometimes rebuilding together creates a stronger bond than the one that first brought you together.